I gave my husband a second chance, and he used it to plan his exit more carefully. The divorce papers arrived on a Wednesday morning. Not through a lawyer's office, not hand-delivered with the gravity it deserved, but in an envelope mixed in with the electricity bill and a supermarket flyer sitting in the metal postbox outside their Lagos home like something ordinary. Amara saw her husband's name in the sender's corner, not his handwriting, a firm's letterhead, and stood at the gate in her house slippers for a long moment before she understood what she was holding. Inside the house, Dayo was eating breakfast. She could hear the television. She could hear the specific sound of his spoon against the ceramic bowl, a sound she had been hearing for 11 years, a sound that was so embedded in the texture of her mornings that she had stopped registering it the way you stop registering the sound of your own breathing. She stood at the gate in her slippers with the envelope in her hand, and she listened to that spoon, and she thought with a clarity that surprised her that she had heard that sound every morning for 11 years and had never once suspected that the man making it was capable of the particular species of cold, methodical cruelty that the envelope in her hand represented. She had given him a second chance. She had done it properly, thoroughly, with the full weight of her heart behind it. She had sat in a counselor's office in Victoria Island for 9 months. She had spoken words she did not know she was capable of speaking. Words about forgiveness, about the architecture of a marriage, about choosing love as a practice rather than a feeling. She had stood in front of her mother and his mother and 3 of their closest friends and renewed vows that she had meant both times, even when one of the times he had not. What she had not known, what the envelope in her hand was now informing her, was that while she was in that counselor's office choosing him, he was in a different kind of office, choosing something else. She put the envelope in her wrapper pocket. She went inside. She sat at the table across from him. She watched him eat. He looked up. "Morning, there's akara left." "Thank you," she said. She did not tell him about the envelope. She needed to think first. Now, here is what you need to understand about Amara Dayo, because she is not the woman you think she is, and this story is not the story you think it is. Not yet. Amara was 38 years old. She was a supply chain consultant who had spent 12 years building a client list that read like an index of Lagos commerce. She was the kind of woman who was described as capable so consistently and by so many different people that she had come to wear it the way other women wore their names, automatically without thinking about it. She was also, underneath the capability, a woman who had done what most people in pain do when they are too proud to show it. She had organized her suffering into something that looked like strength. The first affair had been with a woman named Tolu. Amara had found out the way these things are usually found out. Not dramatically, not with irrefutable clarity of a caught phone, but gradually, through accumulations. A receipt for dinner at a restaurant they hadn't gone to together, a name mentioned twice in different contexts, the specific quality of his distraction on Sunday evenings that she had first attributed to work, and then to temperament, and then eventually, and correctly, to someone else. She confronted him. He had not denied it for long. Dayo was not a man who could sustain a lie under direct pressure, which she had understood to be a virtue when she married him, and now understood to simply be another fact about him, neither virtue nor vice. He had collapsed into remorse with a speed and completeness that had startled her. He had cried in a way she had not seen him cry since his father died. He had said things, true things, she believed, about fear and inadequacy and a period of professional failure he had not known how to discuss. He had said the affair was not about Tolu, that it was about something broken in him that had nothing to do with Amara's worth. She believed him, not naively. She had tested the belief, pressed on it, taken it to the counselor in Victoria Island and held it under the particular unflattering light of therapeutic scrutiny. And it had held. What she had not known, and what the envelope in her wrapper pocket was now informing her, was that she had been testing the wrong thing. She had been testing whether his remorse was real. She had not thought to test whether his patience was longer than his remorse. And if this kind of story is the kind that makes your chest tighten in recognition, stay with us and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because we are only at the beginning. The lawyer's name was on the firm's letterhead, Benson and Associates, Ikeja. She did not recognize it. She looked it up on her phone in the bathroom while Dayo's television carried on in the background. A small firm, 3 years old, specializing in asset protection and family law. Asset protection. She sat on the edge of the bathtub and turned that phrase over in her mind. Asset protection. Not divorce law, not family mediation. Asset protection. The naming of the specialization told her something about the intention behind the filing. This was not a man leaving a marriage in pain. This was a man who had spent time with a lawyer thinking about how to leave a marriage profitably. She opened her banking app, their joint account, the one they had maintained since year 2 of the marriage, and into which both their salaries had historically flowed and from which household expenses were drawn, showed a balance she recognized. Normal, unremarkable. She went to the folder on her phone where she kept receipts and bank notifications. She went back 6 months and began to read. She was in the bathroom for 45 minutes. When she came out, Dayo was getting dressed for work. "You okay?" he said, not looking up from his tie. "Fine," she said. "Slight headache." He nodded. He picked up his car keys. He kissed her on the cheek with the automatic precision of a man who kissed his wife goodbye for 11 years and had, at some point in the past year, stopped meaning it. She stood and received the kiss and watched him leave and listened to his car back out of the compound. Then she called her sister. Adazeoze was 35, 3 years younger than Amara, and she was the person Amara called when she needed someone who would skip the comfort and go directly to the analysis. Adaze was an accountant. More specifically, Adaze was an accountant who had spent the last 8 years handling forensic financial work for a firm in Abuja, which meant she was unusually skilled at finding things in numbers that people had tried to hide. Amara sent her the banking notifications she had found. Then she sat in her living room and waited. Adaze called back in 22 minutes. "Where are you?" Adaze said. "Home." "Is he there?" "He just left for work." "Good." A pause. "Amara, listen to me carefully. These transfers, the ones in October, November, and January, do you recognize the account names they went to?" "No." "Have you heard of a company called Goldbridge Property Holdings?" "No." "What about Sunrise Links Limited?" A pause. "No." "Adaze, what is this?" "I don't know yet. But in the last 6 months, just from what you've sent me, approximately 4 million naira has moved out of accounts connected to your husband into companies you don't recognize." She paused. "These could be legitimate business expenses, but combined with a divorce filing from a firm that specializes in asset protection. Amara, this looks like someone who has been moving money into structures that will be hard to reach in a settlement." Amara sat very still. She said, "How long?" "I don't know. I'm only seeing 6 months. If this has been going on longer, I'd need access to more records." "He could have been doing this since the counseling." "Yes." The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Since the counseling. Since the 9 months in the Victoria Island office. Since the renewed vows and the family gathering and the mothers who needed to believe the story had a good ending. He could have been sitting across from a counselor, discussing the architecture of a marriage, while simultaneously, in a different part of the city, discussing the architecture of its profitable dismantling. "What do I do?" Amara said. "You do not react. Not yet. You do not let him know you have opened that envelope. You go about your day, and you give me 72 hours. This is where the story shifts. Because you have been watching this and thinking you know what kind of story it is. A story about a man who cheated and a woman who was betrayed twice. And it is that, but it is also several other things, and the other things are about to surface. Adaze, in her 72 hours, found more than financial transfers. She found, through channels she declined to specify when she called Amara on the 3rd day, that Goldbridge Property Holdings had a registered director.
The name on the registration was not Dayo's. It was a name Amara did not recognize, Chukwuemeke Adiele. Adaze found a connection to this name to a Lagos address. She found, and this is where the story stops being the story either of them thought they were investigating, that the flat had been rented for 14 months under the name Adiele, but that the utility bills were paid by a direct debit from an account held by Dayo. He's been paying rent on a flat in Lekki for 14 months, Adaze said. Amara heard this. She processed it. Tolu, she said. Maybe, Adaze said, but Chukwuemeke is a man's name. The silence that followed had a specific quality. Not the silence of someone who doesn't understand, but the silence of someone who understands something they were not prepared to understand. Send me the address, Amara said. She did not go immediately. She went 3 days later on a Saturday morning when Dayo had told her he was going to a site meeting for a construction project his firm was managing in Aja. She had nodded and said, "Have a good one," and watched him leave with the same composure she had been maintaining for 6 days, a composure that was costing her something she could feel in her body but could not accurately locate. She drove to Lekki. She found the building. She sat outside in her car for 15 minutes. Then she went in. She had prepared a story for the security guard. She was visiting a friend. She had the flat number. The security guard, a young man who looked bored in the way that only people managing other people's secrets can look bored, waved her through. She took the lift to the 3rd floor. She found the door. She knocked. The man who opened it was 32 or 33, fine-featured, wearing a plain white t-shirt and holding a phone. He looked at her with the specific expression of someone who was expecting no one and is trying to quickly recalibrate. "Is Dayo here?" Amara said.
The man's expression completed its recalibration into something she recognized as careful neutrality, the practiced blankness of someone who has prepared for this possibility and is now executing the preparation. "I don't know who that is," he said. "His name is Adeyoyi Ose. He pays the bills for this flat. I am his wife." She paused. "I am not here to hurt anyone. I am here because I need to understand what is happening." The man looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped back from the door. His name was Emeka. He was 31. He was a graphic designer who had met Dayo at a professional networking event 2 years ago. He was not, he said, aware that Dayo was in the process of divorcing Amara. He was aware that Dayo was married. He had been told consistently and with what Emeka had believed was sincerity that the marriage was over in all but paperwork, that Amara knew, that the two of them were waiting out a period before formalizing things. He had been told this for 18 months. Amara sat in Emeka's living room, the living room her husband's money had furnished, and listened to this and felt something happen in her chest that she could not categorize as any single emotion. It was several emotions occupying the same space simultaneously. Grief, which she recognized, rage, which she expected, and something new, something she had not encountered before, which was the feeling of seeing a complete picture for the first time, and understanding that every partial view she had held before, every theory, every confrontation, every counseling session had been partial in ways she had not known to account for. "Did you know about Tolu?" she said. Emeka frowned. "Who is Tolu?" She looked at him. "Before you," she said carefully, "there was a woman named Tolu. That was the affair I found out about. That was the one that sent us to counseling." She paused. "He told me it was over. He told me she was the mistake, the thing he was running from." Emeka was very quiet. "He told me," he said slowly, "that he had never been involved with anyone else, that I was the first person outside the marriage." He paused. "He said that specifically. He said he wanted me to know it wasn't a pattern." The two of them sat in the Lekki flat and looked at each other across the space of what Dayo had built between them. Not just the lies, but the architecture of the lies, the way they had been specifically designed for each audience, the way he had told each person exactly what they needed to hear to stay. Amara was the first to speak. "I'm going to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to answer me honestly, not for my sake, for yours." Emeka looked at her. "Are you on any of those company registrations? Goldbridge, Sunrise Links?"
He frowned. What companies? Has he ever asked you to sign anything? Any documents, business registrations, anything with your name on it? Emeka was very still. 6 months ago, he said, he asked me to sign something for a business he said he was setting up. He said it was a formality, that my name needed to be on the registration for tax reasons, that it wouldn't affect me in any way. And you signed it. I signed it. Amara looked at the ceiling. She looked back at Emeka. The company your name is on has been receiving transfers from my husband's accounts. If there is ever a divorce settlement and those assets are investigated, your name is on them. Emeka stood up. He stood up the way people stand when the body understands something before the mind has finished processing it. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her, and she could see from the set of his shoulders that he was doing the same thing she had done in the bathroom 6 days ago, reorganizing everything he thought he knew into the shape of what it actually was. He used me, Emeka said. Yes, she said, but not only the way you're thinking. She drove home. She sat in the driveway for a while. She thought about the counselor's office in Victoria Island, the specific chair she had sat in, the box of tissues on the side table that she had needed twice, and had each time felt briefly ashamed of needing. The way the counselor had said in their final session that the work Amara had done to get to this point was remarkable, that not everyone had the capacity to choose repair over rupture. She had been proud of that. She had carried it. She took out her phone and called her lawyer, her own lawyer, not his, a woman named Ada Oranwosun, who had handled her company's contracts for 6 years and who had as a secondary practice area family law. She did not call her to cry. She called her to work. The next 3 weeks were the longest of Amara's life, and they were also, paradoxically, the most focused. She understood now, with a clarity that had come at enormous cost, that the second chance she had given her husband had not been wasted. It was used to construct the architecture of an exit so thorough that it would have been nearly impossible to challenge without the very specific combination of a forensic accountant's sister, a company registration trail, and a Saturday morning drive to Lekki. She had those 3 things. She gave them to Mrs. Ada Oranwosun, and she said, "Tell me what we can do."
Dayo came home that Saturday evening, carrying takeaway containers and wearing the expression of a man who had had a good day. He set the food on the kitchen counter and called her name, and she came from the bedroom and stood in the doorway and looked at him. "Chicken or fish?" he said. "Dayo, sit down." Something moved across his face, a micro-expression, there and gone. He sat at the kitchen table. She sat across from him. She placed the divorce envelope on the table between them. He looked at it. He looked at her. And she watched the performance begin, watched his face arrange itself into something she might, 6 months ago, have read as surprise. She watched him reach for the envelope, open it, scan it. She watched him begin to construct the look of a man seeing this for the first time. "Amara." "Don't," she said, quietly, not angrily. "Please, don't perform for me. We are past that now." He closed the envelope. "When did you get this?" he said. "It's Wednesday." "It's Saturday." "Yes." The arithmetic of that registered. He looked at her with a slightly different expression, something closer to real, something that had shed the performance layer and was down to a more genuine version of his face. Not remorseful, not caught, something more complicated. "What have you been doing since Wednesday?" he asked. "Thinking," she said, "and some other things." "What other things?" She told him about her Daisy. She told him about the transfers, about Gold Bridge, about Sunrise Links. She watched his face as she said each name and each figure, and she watched him do what very controlled people do under pressure. She watched him become more still, more careful, his face closing down layer by layer until it was nearly unreadable. She did not tell him about Lekki. Not yet. "Those are legitimate business structures," he said when she finished. "There's nothing improper about them." "Then you will be able to explain them fully to Mrs. Nwosu." A bit. "Who is Mrs. Nwosu?" "My lawyer."
The stillness went a degree deeper. "You already have a lawyer," he said. "I've had a lawyer for 2 weeks," she said. He looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for longer than either of them could say, and she held the look and did not look away. "How long?" she said. "Dayo, how long were you planning this?" He was quiet for a long moment. The takeaway container sat between them, cooling, the smell of jollof rice filling a kitchen that had never felt smaller. "After we renewed the vows," he said, finally. "A few months after." She had already known this was likely. Hearing it still cost something. "Were you in the counselor's office planning it?" she asked. "No," he said. And then, more quietly, "Not in those sessions, but after. Yes. While I was still going, while I was still doing the work?" He said nothing. His silence was its own answer. "Why?" she said. "Not why you want to leave. I understand that. I can accept that. Why this way? Why spend a year building a financial structure to take as much as possible? Why not just—" "Because I was afraid of you," he said. She stared at him. "Not physically," he said. "I was afraid of what you would do. Amara, you are the most capable person I have ever been close to. I knew that if I simply left, you would dismantle everything. I knew you would get the best lawyer and the best accountant, and you would leave me with nothing." He paused. "I was protecting myself." "From me," she said. "Yes." She sat with this. It was the most honest thing he had said to her in longer than she could trace. "Dayo, I need to tell you something." He waited. "I went to the flat in Lekki." The stillness became absolute. She said, "I met Emeka. We spoke for a long time. He was—" she paused. "He is not what I expected. He is also not what you told him he was. You told him the marriage was effectively over. You told him I knew. You told him he was the first." Dayo looked at his hands. "He didn't know about Tolu," she said. "He didn't know you had done this before. He thought he was the person you had chosen. He thought the story you told him was the whole story." She watched him. "You did to him what you did to me. You gave him exactly enough truth to keep him in place while you arranged everything around him." Dayo was quiet for a long time. Did he stopped, started again. "What did he say?" She said he was angry, appropriately so. "He also asked me, before I left, whether you had ever actually loved me. I told him I thought you had, in your way." She paused. "He asked me whether you loved him. I told him I didn't know. I told him I was probably not the right person to answer that." Dayo put his face in his hands. And Amara watched him. This man she had loved, rebuilt, chosen again, lost, investigated, and was now sitting across from in a kitchen full of cooling jollof rice and 11 years of everything. And she felt the strange, flat calm of a woman who has already done her grieving in private and is now simply managing the aftermath. "The companies," she said. "Mrs. Morsu is going to want a full accounting. Emeka's name is on those registrations, and if you try to use those assets in a way that damages him as well as me, I will make sure his lawyer knows exactly what you asked him to sign and why." She paused. "That is not a threat. It is information." He looked up from his hands. "You are protecting him," he said, and in his voice was something she had not expected. Not jealousy exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that told her that whatever he had felt for Emeka was real, in whatever limited way real was available to him. "I'm not protecting him," she said. "I'm telling you the full shape of the situation so that the decisions you make from here are made with complete information, unlike the decisions I have been making for 11 years. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, Lagos went on the way Lagos goes on. Horns, generators, a neighbor's television, the low, persistent sound of a city that does not pause for private devastation. Dayo stood up. He went to the counter. He stood with his back to her, and she recognized the posture. It was the same posture she had seen Emeka use at the window in Lekki. The posture of a person reorganizing. "What do you want?" he said, not combatively, genuinely. "I want what is fair," she said, not more, not punishment. What is fair? She paused. "And I want you to tell Emeka the truth, the whole truth, not what is convenient for the exit. Everything." He looked up from his hands. "Why does that matter to you?" "Because he's 31 years old and signed a company document with his name on it because he trusted you, and because he thought he was the first, and nobody should have to discover that they were the second version of a pattern, not without being told directly." He looked at her for a long time. "You are..." He stopped. "What?" He said, "I don't have the word for what you are." And it was not a compliment, exactly, and it was not an insult. It was simply true, and they both knew it. The settlement took 4 months. Mrs. Nwosu was, as Amara had expected, thorough. Aderike's financial trail was thorough. The companies were unwound with the assistance of a court order that Dayo's lawyer initially contested, and then, upon being shown the full documentation, had advised his client not to contest further. Emeka's name was removed from the registrations before the proceedings were completed. What Dayo told Emeka I did not know. She had asked for it to happen. She had not asked for a report. She received one anyway, not from Dayo, but from Emeka, who sent a message 3 weeks after the Lekki visit that said simply, "He told me, I am sorry for what happened to you. I hope you are well." She read it twice. She put the phone down. She did not respond immediately. She sat with the message for 2 days, and then she wrote back, "Thank you. I hope you are well also. Take care of yourself." It was not more than that. It did not need to be more than that. The day the settlement was finalized, Amara drove to the beach. Not to a resort, not to a private club, to a public stretch of Lagos beach that she had gone to as a child with her father, where the sand was dark and the water was rougher than it looked, and ordinary people sat and watched the Atlantic with the specific expression of people who have brought something large to the water to set down. She sat there for 2 hours. She thought about the counselor's office in Victoria Island. She thought about the specific chair, the tissue box, the way the counselor had said that the work she had done was remarkable, that not everyone could choose repair over rupture. She had been proud of that. She had been wrong to be proud of exactly that, not because the work wasn't real, but because she had not known that the thing she was repairing was already scheduled for demolition. She had not failed. She needed to say that to herself clearly enough to believe it. She had not failed. She trusted a person who was not trustworthy, and she had done it with all her intelligence and deliberateness at her disposal, and it had not been enough. And that was a fact about him. She could not have known what she did not know. She had operated in the dark, and she had done it as well as a person can.
She sat on the dark sand and watched the Atlantic, and gave herself permission for the first time in 4 months to feel the full weight of 11 years ending. Not the dramatic weight, not the betrayal, not the companies, not the Lekki flat. The ordinary weight. The sound of a spoon against a bowl, the automatic kiss goodbye, the Sunday evenings, the way he sometimes laughed at things she said in a way that made her feel, in those moments, entirely seen. Those things had been real. She did not want to revise them into lies for the sake of a cleaner narrative. They had been real, and they had existed alongside other things that were also real. And human beings were built, apparently, to hold such contradictions without resolving them. And that was the most honest thing she could say about any of it. She stayed until the sun was low. Then she drove home, not the Ikeja house that had been sold as part of the settlement, a flat in Oniru that she had chosen herself, that had no history in it, that smelled of fresh paint and the specific blankness of a space waiting to become somewhere. She made tea. She called Adaeze. "It's done," she said. "How are you?" Adaeze said. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I think that's the honest answer." "It is," Adaeze said. They talked for an hour about nothing consequential, about a show Adaeze was watching, about their mother's upcoming birthday, about a restaurant in Abuja that Adaeze wanted to take her to. Ordinary things, the ordinary weight of ordinary things, which was not light, but which was the only thing after a certain point that could be carried. Dayo left Lagos 6 months after the settlement. She heard this from a mutual friend who mentioned it in passing without knowing it would land the way it landed. He went to Abuja. She did not know whether Emeka went with him. She did not ask. She thought about asking. She decided that some answers were not worth the cost of wanting them. What she kept in the end was this: not bitterness, which would have been understandable, and not the performed serenity of a woman who has decided that forgiveness is the point of the story. She kept something more specific than either of those. She kept the knowledge of what she had survived, not what had been done to her, but what she had managed to not become because of it. She had been lied to comprehensively. She had been planned against in the space that was supposed to be safe. She had discovered things that could have broken her into smaller, meaner pieces. And she had sat in a Lekki flat and spoken with the other person who had been lied to, and had managed to see him as a person rather than as a symbol of her humiliation. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, quite a lot. She was not fixed. She was not resolved. She was a 38-year-old woman in a flat that smelled of fresh paint, who was drinking tea and had survived something, and was going to spend some time in the honest uncertainty of not knowing what came next. And that was enough for now. It was, for now, exactly enough. And if this story sat with you the way it sat with her, if it asked something of you about second chances and what they cost, and who pays, please subscribe to this channel and share this with someone who needs it today. We will be back, and we will see you there.